In this video, I'm going to try to go a little bit more in depth into the egg bread or egg white bread recipe that I posted a few days ago. Again, I can't give enough credit to Maria Emmerich for her recipe. This is definitely 100% her recipe, and I have been loving it. Oh no, dang it. Crisis averted. I'm going to try to answer some questions that I got on my last video and show you a couple different other shapes of bread that I make, the smaller loaf and some of the buns. And I figured we could just chat a little bit while I'm separating egg whites, because that is one of the most monotonous parts of making this bread. And you can buy the cartoned egg whites, like I mentioned in the other video. You're more likely to get a good result if you separate the eggs yourself, and I have found that buying whole eggs and separating them is actually cheaper than buying cartons a lot of the time. And you also end up with a whole dozen egg yolks that you can put into something else. So if you're trying to be frugal, going with the whole eggs is the way to go, and trying to get them on sale. Around here I can get them around 99 cents a dozen on sale fairly often, so that's what I usually do. We do have chickens now, and we are getting like 2 or 3 eggs a day, which is wonderful, but we usually save those for when we're having fried eggs or scrambled eggs or something where you can really taste it, because they taste so much better. But maybe someday when all of our chickens are laying, we'll be able to just use 100% our own eggs. I had a lot of people comment on the last video asking if the bread tastes like angel food cake. And it does have some similarities to angel food cake, but I would say angel food is a lot lighter. I think the egg white powder that you put in here makes the bread more dense. So it really does feel more like bread than like angel food cake. And of course, you're not getting the sweetness that you would get with an angel food cake. So it's really a very different experience. So there are my dozen egg whites all ready to go. I had several comments from people frustrated that they didn't get as nice of a loaf as I got in my last video. And the first thing I'll say is that this recipe really can vary from loaf to loaf, and sometimes I've gotten loaves that aren't quite as nice, and other times they're super nice. I don't know if it has to do with the environment. I expect that's probably part of it, just different day, different humidity level. But beyond those things that you can't control, like the environment, a few things to make sure of when you're doing this recipe. Don't let any egg yolk get in with your egg whites. That can cause it to fail. Don't let any oil or any other liquid, any water for sure, to get in there. Make sure everything is super dry, because any kind of liquid like that is possibly going to cause your egg whites to fall. The other thing to make sure of is that you whip your egg whites enough. I showed in my last video how I know that it's done when the egg whites are not as creamy. They start to kind of clump and they kind of start sliding down the sides of the bowl. You really need to get it to that point. If you don't whip it enough, you're not going to have a great result. Another thing to check is your egg white protein powder. Make sure there's nothing added except egg whites. I have used the Judy's brand that has sunflower lecithin added, and I did have a good result with that. But when in doubt, just make sure that it's 100% egg whites. And if you have a brand that is just not working, it's worth trying another brand, seeing if that's the trouble. Then also, some people make the mistake of using whey protein powder or just any other kind of protein powder, but it really has to be the egg white protein powder for this recipe to work. One more tip is to make sure that you don't beat or whip the mixture after you put the egg white powder in at the end. If you do that, you will get a very dense styrofoam-like consistency. You just want to, I blend it at like level 2 on my KitchenAid just until it's mixed. Definitely don't whip it. All right, I'm gonna get these egg whites going. Another thing you can try if you're not getting a good result is to increase the amount of cream of tartar you use. Go up from a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon and see if that makes any difference. Still super creamy, hasn't started to slide much yet. That's what you want to look for. You see this part over here sliding around the edge? that means it's done. I'm gonna add in the egg white powder, and I found that if I make kind of a well in the middle before I add it in, it doesn't make quite as much of a big poofy mess. 1 cup, and I have my oven preheating to 325, so that's gonna be ready. For the shapes, I'm gonna do a mini loaf over here, and then I'm gonna do some buns in my silicone pans. I really like these. So if I make one recipe, which is what I made, it'll make 2 of the mini loaves, or it'll make 2 pans, 16 little buns. But I'm just gonna do half in each today so I can show you how both of them turn out. Definitely press your batter into the pan because it's so thick and fluffy. You can pour it in there and it'll look like it's in there, but there's really a giant air pocket down at the bottom. Using your spatula will help with that. For the buns, I found just a big soup spoon works the best to get them in here. And again, you want to press it down carefully so you get all the air bubbles out. This one over here is going to be a little bit puny. This one's probably going to look the prettiest. But I'm going to throw these in the oven at 325, and I'm going to start checking the buns after 20 minutes. And I'm going to start checking the loaf after 25 minutes. When I cook my big loaf, I go for 30 minutes. But I do make sure to check these because sometimes I've had it where I just needed to cook it for an extra 5 minutes. Other times it's done after 20 minutes. I don't understand all the reasoning, but you just want to tap on it and make sure it doesn't feel gushy inside, like it's still liquidy. That's just the best way that I have found to know that they're done. I like to cook these on a rack just above the middle of the oven because I don't want the bottoms to get too brown. I like to get the top nice and brown too, so having it closer to the element is good. I had a couple people ask about these rounds that I used when I made the eggs, the egg rounds in the other video, and they were wondering if I have used these to make the egg bread, like make egg bread rounds. And yes, I definitely have, and it works great. I tend to, though, just make the loaves of bread because I find that just to be the easiest and the quickest. It's just annoying to, arrange the dough into the rounds when you can just throw it all into one pan. It's the same with the buns that I just made. I don't make those super often either. It's just sometimes a bun shape just comes in handy for certain things. But typically I just make the loaf and slice it, and that's what we use for breakfast sandwiches and other things. They've been going for 20 minutes and they're still a little soft. So I'm gonna let them go another 5 minutes for sure, maybe 10 minutes. So they both ended up cooking for 30 minutes, which is the same as the large loaf of bread. And I'm gonna turn off the oven, but I'm gonna remove the buns from the oven because I don't want them to get too dried out since they're so small. But I'm gonna leave the small loaf in the oven for 15 minutes to cool down a little bit slowly. These are just going to sit here until they're completely cooled off. Of course, these will cool off a lot faster, and actually they kind of separate from the pan, and so they're already pretty easy just to pull out. I like how the little holes in the bottom of the pan make the bottom kind of cool. I love how these turn out with some nice crust on top and nice crust on bottom, and then the middle is still really fluffy. So these are my favorite kind of buns. I like that they're deep. When I made the rounds with the little egg rounds like I showed you, they were flatter and it was more crust than I like. I prefer a lot more fluff in the middle. Of course you could heap those rounds up a little higher, but I just like the size of these. They make great sliders and little sandwiches. You can do a quick peanut butter sandwich that's really good. They just really come in handy for a lot of things. So here's what my loaf looks like. With the silicone pan, I feel like the bottom gets a little browner than with the aluminum pan that I use for the big loaf, but it still turns out fine. It's completely cool now, so I'm gonna go ahead and slice it up. So this is a really good size for the breakfast sandwiches I make because the sausage round is about that big and you can fit an egg on top and a slice of cheese, and that works out great. After I get this all sliced, we'll move over to the stove and I'll show you how the bread toasts. I had several people ask about the toasting ability. It definitely toasts really well. I just have a few tips on how to get a really good result when you toast. One funny thing about this bread is how you always get these random shapes. It's never the perfect, you know, bread loaf shape, and there's no rhyme or reason. There's just so random about how the loaf bakes and how the shape is formed. It's crazy. To show you how this bread grills up, I'm gonna make a turkey and Swiss melt with a little bit of horseradish mustard. And my biggest tip for grilling this bread is to remember that it browns a lot faster than regular bread. So if you're making a sandwich with fillings, a lot of times you don't have enough time for the fillings to heat up and the cheese to melt before the outside is really brown. So what I do is I preheat the fillings before I put them in the sandwich and before I start browning. So I'm just gonna turn on my stove, and you do wanna put your stove at a little bit lower of a temperature because it does brown so fast. I'm gonna make 2 sandwiches, so I'll get my turkey slices ready and my cheese. And when you're using meat, you can totally just set the meat in the pan and heat it up that way, but I find it's just the easiest to throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds to a minute. Adding a little mustard, turkey and cheese on each one. My pan is heated up. Butter on the bottom of the pan, of course, and then I'm gonna go ahead and butter the tops of the bread so that when I flip them over, they'll have plenty of butter on them. Butter is bubbly, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw the sandwiches in. It's been just about 2 minutes and I only have it on medium heat because I don't want it to brown too much, and you can see it's nicely toasted down there. So time to flip. So it really just took about 1.5 to 2 minutes on each side, and that is perfect. Several people were interested in how well this bread toasts, so I'm going to give a quick demo here in my air fryer toaster oven. The main thing is you want to keep an eye on it because it does brown faster than you might be used to with regular bread. It's almost done with the toast cycle, but I noticed it was looking a little brown, so I'm going to go ahead and pull these out. There's a view. Looks like toast. The edge got really brown. But that's what the back looks like. Once it's toasted, you definitely want to put something on it like jam or butter or whatever you put on toast. When you try to eat it plain toasted, it's not very good. But who eats dry toast anyway? So I've also used this recipe for making pizza crust and Hot Pockets and calzone style things. If you guys are interested in seeing a video about that, please comment down below. Hope you guys are all doing great, and I will see you in the next video.